symposium is important because it brings a diverse range of stakeholders that relate to climate change. Here we're talking about the whole breadth from the farmers to researchers and also even policymakers. So we are bringing them together, including students who are also learning, but some are doing research on these issues. They will come to the same area and share knowledge on the current state of how climate change is impacting and even unveiling itself in our lives. And that knowledge will then be taken forward in terms of the different ways in which, for farmers, they go and they respond accordingly. For researchers, they'll pick out the research topics that they can pursue. And for policymakers, they'll be more aware and they'll come up with strategies that can be used to address this whole problem. The Farmer Support Group is a unit that was formed to support smallholder farmers who are generally not receiving adequate extension services, particularly knowledge coming from research filtering down to their level. Small farmers, as we say, are at the core phase of climate change. They are living the experience of climate change. They are realizing the variability in rainfall. They are also realizing that some of their varieties and even livestock are no longer very adapted due to climate change. The Farmer Support Group decided to be a member of the Adaptation Network because that allows us to be part of a bigger group that is looking at this challenge and looking at how the communities can adapt to climate change. We think that we can bring our knowledge to the table and our experiences that we are having with farmers, but also the farmers, the other colleagues in the adaptation networks can bring us also knowledge that we might not be accessing. So it's a win-win situation that we find.
This year, the Adaptation Network is privileged to collaborate with the University of KwaZulu-Natal on the Howard Davis Memorial Symposium. This year's theme, looking at smallholder farmers and climate change, speaks to the vision of the Adaptation Network for creating a resilient Africa for all. And in that spirit, the Adaptation Network and its members works towards creating climate-resilient communities, climate-resilient systems. The Adaptation Network is a platform where different practitioners, stakeholders, constituting of civil society, government departments, business, and others interested or working on climate change adaptation issues come together to share knowledge, share different technologies and experiences in efforts to building a resilient Africa. We are privileged to partner and we hope to have a productive symposium.
Climate change really is a huge deal for small-scale farmers. They're so vulnerable to any shocks on their systems. And the kind of things that we're starting to see, for example, erratic rainfall is probably the thing that affects them the most, certainly crop farmers, because you're having very intense rainfall events causing flooding and waterlogging, and then you're having periods of dry weather. And sometimes that's in the middle of the rainy season, and obviously impacts on crop yields are huge. I think it's all about how we make farmers more resilient and how we work with them to strengthen their capacity to adapt and to innovate. Farmer skills play a huge role in developing solutions or new ways of doing things, and also highlights the need to develop the capacities of people within support organizations to actually support that process. And we talk about joint innovation or joint experimentation. and about how we can bring different bodies of knowledge together to help people adapt. The other climate change impact that I think is worth talking about is the increase in temperature, which is obviously what we're all aware of, but we've got to think about what it means for farmers. And one of the impacts is distribution of parasites. In particular, I'm thinking about bont ticks. They're ticks that carry heartwater disease, and they're generally restricted to sort of valley bushveld areas or generally warmer parts of the country. But what we're seeing now is that the incidence is spreading to areas that are generally cooler. And with that, we're going to have an incidence of heartwater affecting livestock. We generally tell people to buy livestock from the area where they're going to be keeping it, because then it's more likely to be adapted to the diseases that it's going to be exposed to. But now what we're seeing is that even within the area, we're getting the incidence of diseases that we might not have previously had. And so farmers are going to have to learn about new diseases and how to control them. I think an important part of any organization is about networking with others. It's all about networking with other people who are also focused on building farmers' capacity to adapt and innovate.
Dealing with climate change is quite complex because it just doesn't affect one area. So it's not just that, when there is no water, it means crops fail. It means there is no income. It means someone is going to fail to go to school. It also means disease and sickness thrives. So you need to come up with a very comprehensive and holistic package that understands all of these things. And at the heart of it, there has to be a realization that there are people involved who have aspirations, who have dreams, and whatever you do has to take into consideration what are those aspirations. How can we work with them to support them to realize these dreams, even though they are in these areas that might not be ideal, but how do we support them? What can we do with them that works? What do they know? What knowledge do they have that we can incorporate? Climate change has been ongoing for quite a while, and as we saw even with the floods, the fact that it affects disproportionately the poor and marginal who are settled in areas that are not suitable for either human habitation or agriculture. It's the same context that we see as well with farmers in rural areas, that they are disproportionately affected by climate change and they lack the means to adapt in a long-term way to climate change. And to understand the impacts of climate change and extreme weather events on smallholder farmers, one is to actually understand the context that most of these farmers live in. So it perpetuates poverty in these areas. And that's why we termed our center transformative agriculture, because it's not just about making small changes here and there. It's about changing the whole paradigm, the whole trajectory, the whole system within which smallholder farmers are living in, and within which they have to deal with climate change and its complexities. A lot of it is building people's capacities, enhancing their capacities, training them, giving them the skills, the information, the training to be able to use that information. And we've come in to support with information to say, today is too hot, don't go outside, don't weed today, or today there are strong winds, don't be spraying or don't be starting a fire today, it will become uncontrollable. So part of it is also training them and equipping them with knowledge on better farming practices, soil regeneration, ecological, agroecological practices of farming, so that whilst we are focusing on improving their yields, we are also rehabilitating the environment and the nature which supports their livelihoods in these areas. So you don't assume that they don't know anything, because they know something. They've been there, they are rich with knowledge. So how do we tap into that knowledge? How do we integrate it with the science that we have? How do we work together to co-develop solutions and implement them together in a way where they are learning as they are doing and they're taking ownership of these interventions.
The climate crisis arises from industrialization and the burning of fossil fuels. So in the 1780s, the steam engine was invented, and since then, the carbon dioxide levels worldwide have gone up from 280 parts per million up to 418 parts per million last year. But concurrent with that, we have other greenhouse gases that are also important, and they're also increasing. The result of that is they create a blanket effect around the Earth, and it traps heat. Now, that blanket effect is good because otherwise the Earth would be very cold. But the problem is it's too much. These extra greenhouse gases push more energy into the whole Earth system, and the result of that is that we end up with dramatically more severe weather events. One of the worst effects of the climate change is on agriculture and food production. So food security is dramatically at risk all over the world because of drought or flood, extreme heat or extreme cold. All of those impact on food production. What can we do as an agricultural faculty? I think that we have to focus on what everyone now calls resilience. If we look at crops, we have to breed varieties that are tolerant of drought, of heat, of cold. And at the moment, we've bred largely for yield and maybe quality for the flavor. Now we need to focus on resilience, which is environmental tolerance. My colleague Shimilis and I published a paper on how long does it take to breed a crop, and it can take you up to 25 years to breed a sorghum hybrid. We don't have 25 years. And to do that, we need the funding. And the problem is that people look at the immediate needs of society, and they're not actually looking at the long-term needs, even if it's a 5 to 10 year timescale. But to get government agencies and funders and philanthropists to fund on a 10-year to 20-year timescale is very difficult. I think that's the challenge we face as a university. Each one of us needs to become an activist, to push every button, to write, to speak, to make a demand. And there's a very interesting social phenomena that when more than 25 to 30% of a population push for something, at the point, there's a tipping point of around 26%, where 26% of people push for something, it becomes the norm. And that's why each one of us does matter. And we need to commit to changing the climate crisis and actually making concrete changes to the fossil fuel consumption that we participate in at the moment.